Aara Langford pressed her back against the wall and tried to disappear. Her mother had told her that very morning, "Stay quiet, stay small, let your sister shine." So Aara stood at the far edge of the ballroom with her hands folded tight and her chin tilted down. Exactly the way she'd been taught. She was 22 years old. She had spent every one of those years learning how to make herself invisible. She was very good at it. That night was supposed to be no different. It was. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please subscribe and follow along all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The night had barely begun when Aara's mother took her by the arm. "Stand here," her mother said, steering her toward the far corner near the refreshment table, her grip light but purposeful. The grip of a woman who had long since stopped asking and simply arranged. "Right here. Don't wander."
"Mama, I wasn't going to." "Hush."
Her mother's hand released her arm and moved, briefly, to straighten the collar of Aara's dress. Not tenderly, efficiently. "Your sister needs space to move. You crowd her, Aara. You always have, even when you don't mean to." Aara opened her mouth, closed it. "Smile," her mother added, already turning away. "Not like that. Less teeth. You look frightened." And then she was gone, gliding back across the floor toward Arabella, and the moment she reached her elder daughter, her whole body transformed. Her shoulders lifted, her chin rose. She laughed at something Arabella said, a full, bright, genuine laugh, the kind she kept stored away for the people she considered worth the effort. Aara watched. She had watched all her life. She was good at watching. Arabella Langford did not enter a room so much as ignite it. That was the only word Aara had ever found that fit. Ignite. The way heads turned, the way voices softened, the way men who had been perfectly composed 30 seconds before suddenly found reasons to stand a little straighter. It had been like this since Arabella was 15, and it had never once lessened. Tonight, she was radiant. Aara could acknowledge that without resentment, or so she told herself. The pale blue gown, the dark hair dressed high, the laugh that carried exactly the right distance, musical and unforced. Arabella had never once had to practice being noticed. It came to her the way breathing came to other people. "She looks well tonight." Clara Patton appeared at Aara's elbow. 18, bright-eyed, with the easy confidence of a girl who had never stood against a wall if she didn't want to. "Your sister, she looks very well." "She always does," Aara said pleasantly. "My mother thinks she'll be engaged before summer's end." Clara tilted her head. "Your mother must be so pleased." Your dress is very pretty, by the way." Clara said it the way people say things they don't entirely mean, but want credit for meaning. Warmly, with a sideways smile, as though offering a small but worthy charity. "Thank you," Aara said. Clara drifted away toward a louder group of girls, and Aara turned back toward the room. She heard the whisper about an hour before he arrived. It came from two women standing to her left, speaking behind their fans with the particular velocity of people who have been holding something all day and can no longer contain it. "Mrs. Hartwell confirmed it," the shorter one said. "He sent word this morning. He'll be here tonight." "Ashton Worthington? The Duke? Who else? He's been in Richmond 3 weeks on the estate business. He's obligated to show. But they say he hasn't attended a proper gathering in 2 years." She paused meaningfully. "Not since his wife passed." The taller woman made a low sound. "Poor man." "Rich man," the shorter one corrected, with the brisk precision of someone who considered sentiment a luxury. "Very rich. Very unmarried. And from what I understand, very—" She stopped, looked around, lowered her voice to something nearly inaudible. Difficult. Difficult how? Private. Cold, some say. He speaks to no one he doesn't choose to speak to, and he doesn't choose often. Mrs. Hartwell's been trying to get him to attend for months. She snapped her fan shut with satisfaction. Tonight, she finally succeeded. They both turned, almost involuntarily, toward the entrance. Aara did not turn. She stared at the floor and told herself the conversation was none of her business, and that the name Ashton Worthington meant nothing particular to her. She told herself that firmly for the next hour. Her mother found her again just before 8. "You've been standing here for 40 minutes, her mother said, arriving at her side with the brisk efficiency of a woman managing too many things at once. Her eyes swept Aara up and down. "You look like you're waiting for the evening to end." "I'm perfectly comfortable, Mama." "You look obvious." Her mother stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I can see you from across the room. Every time I look up, there you are. Same spot, same expression. It draws attention, Aara. The wrong kind. I thought you wanted me to stay put." "I wanted you to stay unobtrusive. There is a difference." She straightened the sleeve of Aara's dress with 2 short, sharp tugs. "Go speak to the Calhoun girls. You know them well enough." "We're not friendly enough for me to walk over uninvited." "Then stand near them and smile. You don't have to speak. Just don't stand here looking—" She stopped herself, breathed. "Looking like what you look like." The silence that followed had edges. "I'll move," Aara said. Her mother studied her face for a moment. Something passed through her eyes, brief, unformed, something that might have grown into an apology if it had been given any room. It wasn't given room. "Arabella is doing beautifully," her mother said instead, her voice softening into something almost reverential. "Mrs. Hartwell has been speaking of her all evening. There's a real opportunity here, a real one, and I need everything tonight to go smoothly." She paused. "Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." A nod. "Don't make me come back over here." And she was gone again. Aara pressed her back against the wall and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way her old nursemaid had once taught her when she was 7 years old and crying over something she'd been told didn't matter. It doesn't matter, she told herself. She was 22 years old, and she still had not decided whether that was true. She was studying the stitching on her gloves when she heard Arabella's voice. Close, suddenly, closer than expected. "Aara!" Arabella appeared at her side with the ease of someone who moved through the world without friction, a glass of punch in one hand, and a smile that had not yet found a reason to dim. "Why are you hiding over here?" "I'm not hiding. Mama asked me to." "Mama asks you to do a lot of things." Arabella glanced around the room with the satisfied sweep of someone who already knew everything she'd find. "You ought to dance. Mr. Ellison has been at loose ends all evening. I could introduce you." "I'm all right." "You're standing against a wall at a summer ball, Aara." "I'm comfortable." Arabella looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not unkind, genuinely not unkind, which somehow made it worse. It was the expression of someone looking at a problem they don't have the tools to solve. "You make yourself too small," she said. "You always have." "Someone has to," Aara said quietly. Arabella opened her mouth, then closed it. She tilted her head. For just a moment, one unguarded, unscripted moment, something moved through her eyes that looked almost like understanding. Then someone called her name from across the room, and the moment dissolved, and Arabella was already turning, already smiling, already halfway back into the current of the evening. "Think about the dancing," she called back over her shoulder. Aara watched her go. Someone has to be small, she thought. In every room, there must be a shadow, or there's no way to see the light. She had always been the shadow. She had learned not to begrudge it. Almost. She heard them without meaning to. Two women, older, seated in chairs 3 feet to her right, speaking at a volume that assumed no one nearby was worth discretion. "The Langford girls. You see them? The one in blue is the beauty, no question about that." "And the other?" A pause. "The other is very sensible, I'm sure." A small mutual laugh, the sound of fans opening. "A shame. The mother clearly poured everything into one vessel." "Well," the first voice lowered, not quite low enough. "Not every girl can be Arabella Langford. Some are just meant to be the sister." Aara kept her eyes forward. Her face remained perfectly still. She was very good at keeping her face still. She'd had years of practice, a whole childhood of practice, a whole life of standing in rooms where things were said about her without the speakers bothering to lower their voices all the way. Just meant to be the sister. She breathed in, breathed out, looked at the far wall, and counted the candles on the nearest sconce until the burning in her chest subsided to something manageable. 7 candles. She was counting 7 candles when the room changed. She felt it before she saw it. A shift, a drop in the ambient noise, brief and collective, the way a flock of birds changes direction all at once without any signal visible to the human eye. Then she saw him. Duke Ashton Worthington stood at the entrance to the room with Mrs. Hartwell at his side, and for just a moment he was still, taking in the room with the quiet, unhurried attention of a man who was accustomed to rooms adjusting themselves to him rather than the other way around. He was not what she had assembled in her imagination. She had built, without meaning to, the sort of figure that stories produced, commanding, broad, loud in his authority. But he was none of those things. He was lean and composed, dressed plainly for a man of his standing, and there was a quality to his stillness that was not coldness exactly, but control, the careful, deliberate stillness of someone who had learned at great personal cost to move through the world without spilling. His face was unreadable. Across the room, Aara's mother had already materialized at Arabella's shoulder. She watched her mother's lips move, quick, urgent, too far away to hear, and watched Arabella draw herself up almost imperceptibly, tilting her chin, letting her laugh carry just slightly further than it needed to. Perfectly positioned, perfectly illuminated, perfectly everything. He glanced at Arabella. It was a brief glance, the kind of glance a man gives when something bright and obvious catches the corner of his eye, and he registers it and moves on. He took in Arabella Langford in approximately 2 seconds and looked elsewhere. Arabella, Aara realized with a small, strange shock, had not noticed. She was still laughing. He worked the room the way a man fulfills an obligation, thoroughly, without pleasure, without impatience. He accepted introductions. He responded the conversation with 2 or 3 words, where another man might have offered 20. He did not seek company. He did not encourage it. And yet no one walked away from him looking offended. There was something in his manner that communicated, with complete clarity, that this was simply who he was. Not rudeness, just an absence of performance. Aara found herself watching him more than she meant to. She told herself it was because there was nothing else worth watching. She knew it wasn't true. She had just turned away, firmly, deliberately, directing her attention back toward the middle distance, when she felt it again, that specific, deliberate weight of being observed. She counted 3 full seconds. Then she looked. He was 12 feet away, not across the room. 12 feet.
Close enough that she could see the exact set of his jaw, the particular gray of his eyes in the candlelight. Gray, she confirmed. Definitely gray. And the stillness she had noticed from across the room was somehow even more complete up close, as though he had simply decided to stop moving, and the world had agreed. He was looking at her. Not at Arabella, who had drifted closer to this side of the room with the strategic precision that Aara had watched her mother rehearse 100 times. Not at Clara Patton, who was nearby and lovely and laughing. Not at the refreshment table, which was an arm's length away and far more practical a reason to be in this corner. At her. Aara Langford. Pressed against the wall, gloves slightly creased, half a glass of lemonade in her hand, and no particular reason, no reason in the world, to be looked at by a man like this. 22 years of practice told her to look away first. 22 years of pressing herself small and unnoticed, of standing in corners and counting candles and telling herself it didn't matter. All of it said, look away, don't reach, don't want. You know how this ends. She held his gaze. She did not look away. For a long, suspended, wordless moment, the room continued around them. Her mother laughed. The fiddler played. Arabella dazzled. The whole evening moved and shifted and breathed. And Duke Ashton Worthington stood 12 feet away from the girl everyone had been looking past all night. And he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that wasn't performing. Then the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, just once. Something small and quiet that was not quite a smile, but was not quite nothing either. Something that held a question in it, careful and serious. The kind of question asked by a man who does not ask lightly. Aara did not breathe. She did not move. She stood against that wall the way she had been standing against walls her whole life, and for the first time in 22 years, she did not feel invisible. She felt found. He walked toward her, not toward Arabella, not toward the refreshment table, not toward the circle of well-dressed men who had been quietly angling for an introduction all evening. He walked toward her, toward Aara Langford, the girl in the corner, the sensible one, the shadow, with the same unhurried, deliberate stride of a man who had already made up his mind about where he was going and saw no reason to apologize for it. Aara's first instinct was to look behind her. She actually did it, turned her head half a turn, checking, as though someone else must be standing there, someone more worth walking toward. There was no one, just the wall. She turned back. He was 8 feet away now. 6, and she had approximately 3 seconds to decide what to do with her face, her hands, the half-empty glass of lemonade she was holding like a shield, and the full weight of 22 years that had spent their entire duration preparing her for this particular moment by telling her it would never come. "Ma'am," he stopped in front of her, not close enough to be improper, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind put there not by age alone, but by years of squinting into something difficult. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who did not often raise it. "You appear to be the only person in this room not trying to speak to me. I thought that was worth acknowledging." Aara blinked. It was possibly the least romantic opening she had ever heard in her life. It was also, she realized with a start, completely sincere. "I wasn't aware," she said carefully, "that avoiding you was a strategy worth rewarding. Your Grace.
Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. It hadn't quite become a smile yet. But it was the predecessor of one. The possibility of one. It wasn't avoidance, he said. You weren't watching for me at all. No, she agreed. I wasn't. That's unusual. I'd imagine it is. He studied her for a moment, with those gray eyes that seemed to be doing genuine work. Not the surface-level assessment that men turned on Arabella, cataloging and measuring, but something more careful than that. Something more like reading. I don't believe we've been introduced, he said. We haven't. She kept her voice steady through the pure, sheer force of will she had been building since age 7. Aara Langford. The younger Miss Langford. He said it without inflection, not dismissively, just precisely, the way a man confirms a fact. The very same, she paused. I'm sure you've heard all about my sister. I've heard a great deal about your sister, he said. I find that I'm more interested in the woman standing in the corner counting the candles. The lemonade glass nearly slipped. She caught it, barely, and stared at him, and for one completely unguarded half-second, she forgot everything her mother had ever taught her about composure. You saw that, she said. 7, he said, on the near sconce. You counted 7. She did not know what she had expected from this conversation, had not, truthfully, expected a conversation at all. But it was not this. It was not a man who noticed things no one else bothered to notice, who spoke without performance, whose attention felt less like being displayed and more like being read. Why were you counting? He asked. She considered lying. It would have been sensible. She was good at sensible. Because 2 women said something unpleasant, she said instead, and I needed somewhere to put my attention that wasn't them. He didn't press for what they'd said. He seemed to understand without needing it explained. That, more than anything, more than the directness, more than the gray eyes, more than the simple fact of him walking toward her instead of Arabella, that unsettled her. Because she was not accustomed to being understood quickly. She was accustomed to being misread, overlooked, filed away under a category that required no further thought. Miss Langford, he said, and there was something careful in the way he said it, something that felt like a door being tried before it was fully open. Would you do me the courtesy of walking with me? The far side of the room is less crowded, and I am finding the center of it— He paused. Excessive. She almost said no. The reflex was bone deep. Stay small. Stay put. Don't reach. Don't want. You know how this ends. Yes, she said. She knew the moment they began to move. She felt it, the way you feel weather changing. The shift in the air. The collective reorientation of attention that swept across the room as subtly and inevitably as a tide. She didn't have to look to know that Mrs. Hartwell had noticed. She didn't have to look to know that Clara Patton had noticed. She didn't have to look to know that every woman over 40 in this room was already revising her calculations for the evening. She looked anyway. Her mother was standing 12 feet away, in mid-conversation with the Hartwell woman, and her face had done something Aara had never seen it do before. It had gone completely, perfectly still. Not composed, not carefully arranged, but frozen. As though the signal it had been sending had simply stopped. As though the mechanism behind it had encountered something it had no protocol for. Then her mother's eyes found hers. Aara did not look away. Don't you dare, her mother's eyes said, in a language they had been speaking at each other for 22 years, sharp and wordless and entirely mutual. Don't you dare do something that makes this evening about you. Aara turned and walked with the Duke of Alastaster to the far side of the room. You're quiet, he said. They had reached the less crowded side,
and he had stopped near the tall windows, and for a moment neither of them spoke. And then he said it, not as a complaint, observationally, the way you note the weather. "I've been told," she said. "I meant it as a compliment." She glanced at him sideways. "Most people don't." "Most people," he said, "are unnerved by silence because they've never learned to inhabit it." He looked out toward the room, his gaze traveling over the bright, moving, laughing crowd, with the expression of a man watching something he no longer entirely belongs to. "Your sister fills every silence she finds. She's very good at it." "She is," Aara agreed, and meant it. "So is every other person in this room." He paused. "You're the only one I've seen tonight who left a silence alone." She didn't know what to do with that. She turned it over in her mind and found no familiar category for it. No slot in the filing system she had built to process what people said to her, and about her, and around her as though she couldn't hear. "I've had practice," she finally said. "In silence?" "In being overlooked." She said it without bitterness, just plainly, the way you say a true thing you've had long enough to make peace with. When you're the quiet one in a room full of louder people, you get a great deal of practice at it. He turned to look at her. Really look. The focused, unhurried kind she had felt from across the room, and which was, she was discovering, even more discomposing up close. "Who told you that you were the quiet one?" "Everyone," she said simply. "And you believe them?" "When a thing is said often enough." "It starts to feel like truth," he finished. Something moved through his expression. Something that recognized the sentence from the inside. "Yes, I know that particular process." The room moved around them. The fiddler played something brighter. Arabella laughed, and the sound carried, beautiful and effortless. And Aara stood at the far edge of the party, next to a man she had met 20 minutes ago, and felt, strangely, terrifyingly, less alone than she had felt in years. She heard her mother before she saw her. "Your Grace." Her mother arrived at Aara's left side with the velocity of a woman who had been moving with purpose for the last 4 minutes and had not slowed once. Her voice was warm, musical, perfectly modulated. The voice she kept in reserve for moments when a great deal depended on the next 30 seconds. "I do hope my daughter hasn't been monopolizing your evening." Aara said nothing. Her spine straightened by approximately half an inch. The Duke turned with a courtesy that was complete and absolutely impersonal. "Not at all, ma'am. I sought her company, not the other way around." A fractional hesitation, the tiniest recalibration in her mother's expression, barely visible, completely visible to Aara, who had been reading that face her entire life. "How very kind," her mother said. Then, smoothly, with the seamless ease of someone shifting a conversation from one track to another, "My elder daughter Arabella has been so hoping for a chance to speak with you this evening. She's admired your family's philanthropic work in Richmond enormously. She's just there, in blue. I wonder if you might allow me to introduce—" "Miss Langford," the Duke said, looking at Aara. "I wonder if you might be willing to take a turn around the room with me later in the evening." Her mother stopped speaking. It was the first time Aara had ever seen her mother stop speaking mid-sentence. The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds. It felt much longer. "I'd like that," Aara said. "Yes." Her mother's hand found her arm, light, brief, the pressure of a word not yet spoken. "Aara has a delicate constitution," she said, recovering with the impressive swiftness of long practice. "She tires easily in the heat. I wouldn't want to—" "I'm perfectly well, Mama," Aara said. The words came out calm, steady. The voice of a woman who had decided something, quietly and without drama. Somewhere between the counting of 7 candles and the far side of the room. She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. She simply said it. "I'm perfectly well," and left it standing in the air between them like a small, firm, irrevocable fact. Her mother looked at her. Aara looked back. "Of course," her mother said after a moment. Her voice had changed. Not much. A degree, maybe two. The warmth still present, the grace still intact. But underneath it now, something cooler and sharper. Something that said, "This conversation is not over." She turned back to the Duke with a smile that cost her something. "You'll forgive me. I must see to our other guests." She left. The Duke said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is she often like that?" "Always," Aara said. "And you generally let her?" "Yes," Aara said. "Generally." He looked at her steadily. "But not tonight." She breathed in. The room was warm and bright and loud, and her mother was already across it, already recalculating, already moving toward Arabella with new instructions in her posture. "Not tonight," Aara agreed. She was beginning to understand that he was a man who asked questions the way most men did not. Not to fill silence, not to perform interest, but because he actually wanted the answer. It was a disorienting quality. She kept bracing for the moment it stopped, for the moment his attention slid sideways towards something shinier, and she was filed back under sensible and forgotten. The moment didn't come. "You read," he said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" "You mentioned feeling overlooked rather than appearing overlooked. It's a particular distinction. People who make it generally live somewhat inside their own heads." A pause. "I mean that generously." She almost laughed. She caught it, but barely. "Yes, I read." "What?" "Everything I can find. History, natural philosophy, the occasional novel, though my mother considers those a waste of—" She stopped, caught herself softening a story she usually kept internal. "She considers them impractical." "And you?" "I consider them necessary." She paused. "In the way that breathing is necessary, not decorative, actually required." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a library," he said, "at my estate in Chesterfield County. Roughly 4,000 volumes. I've read perhaps 1,100 of them." She looked at him. "I mention it," he said, with the careful, controlled gravity of a man trying very hard not to seem like he is offering something large, "because you look like a woman who would find the remaining 2,900 of significant interest." The heat in her chest was not embarrassment. She was fairly certain it was not embarrassment. She had felt embarrassment her whole life, and it had always been smaller than this, sharper, directed inward. This was something else, something that spread rather than contracted. "That is," she said, "a very unusual thing to say to a woman you have known for 30 minutes. I've found that unusual things said plainly tend to be better received than expected things said beautifully," he said. "Though I'm told my social instincts are questionable." "Who told you that?" "Everyone," he said. And something about the way he said it, the slight, deliberate echo of her own word, returned to her with a precision that was not accidental, hit her directly behind the sternum, where she kept things she hadn't decided what to do with yet. It was Clara Patton who found her first. The moment the Duke was drawn briefly into a conversation with a business associate of Mrs. Hartwell's. The kind of brief, obligatory exchange that lasted exactly as long as it had to, and no longer. Clara appeared at Aara's elbow with the focused energy of a girl who has been watching from a distance and can no longer stand it. "Aara Langford," she said, in a voice that was nearly a whisper but wasn't quite. "What in the world is happening?" "I don't know what you mean," Aara said. "He's been standing with you for 40 minutes. Clara's eyes were wide, genuinely wide, not theatrical. My mother has counted. She's been counting. A pause. Your mother looks like she's going to be unwell. Aara glanced across the room. Her mother was standing with Arabella, and they were both looking in her direction. And her mother's expression had acquired the specific, tight-lipped quality that meant she was saying things, rapidly and quietly, that she did not want anyone nearby to hear. Arabella, for her part, did not look angry. She looked, and this surprised Aara because she had not anticipated it, genuinely puzzled. The way someone looks when a situation has stopped following the pattern they understood it to follow. She'll be fine, Aara said. Your sister looks confused. My sister is rarely confused. Aara watched Arabella's face across the room, watched the precise moment when Arabella's gaze found the Duke, found Aara, moved between the two of them, and arrived at a calculation she visibly did not know what to do with. I think she'll manage. Clara leaned in. What are you talking about over there? Books, Aara said. Philosophy. Silence. She paused. The difference between a thing that is said often and a thing that is true. Clara stared at her. You are so strange, she said, with complete affection. I mean that kindly. I know you do, Aara said. The twist came from a direction she had not watched. She had been managing her mother. She had been managing her own heartbeat. She had been managing the wild, dangerous, completely irrational hope that had been building in her chest for the last hour, like water behind a dam, pressing at every joint, finding every weakness. What she had not been managing was Arabella. It happened quickly. She saw it in pieces. Arabella detaching herself from their mother with a small, graceful movement, a turn of the shoulder, a shift of direction. She saw Arabella move through the room with the ease of someone who moved everywhere easily. She saw Arabella arrive. Your Grace? Arabella's voice was warm and rich, and entirely without affectation, because Arabella had never needed affectation. She simply was what she was, and what she was had always been enough. Forgive me. I've been hoping all evening for a chance to tell you how much I admired your remarks at the Richmond Assembly last autumn. You spoke about land reform, I believe? My father discussed it for weeks. The Duke turned, accepted the introduction with perfect courtesy. And Arabella smiled, her real smile, the one that wasn't performed, the one that Aara had grown up watching dissolve the composure of every person it was ever turned on, and said, I'm Arabella Langford. I believe you've met my sister. I have, the Duke said. He glanced at Aara. Brief, direct. Something passed through it that she couldn't fully translate. You are still here. I see you still. Before he returned his attention to Arabella, with the measured politeness of a man completing an obligation. Your father spoke well of you at the assembly, Miss Langford. Arabella tilted her head. Did he? I hope favorably. He said you were... A pause, fractional, deliberate. The pride of his household. The smile didn't waver, but Aara, who had spent 22 years reading her sister's face across distances and through silences and through rooms full of noise, saw the moment, so small, so brief, barely there at all, when Arabella understood that the compliment had been directed at their father and not at her. How kind, Arabella said, and her voice was still warm, still beautiful, still everything it always was. The Duke said, If you'll excuse us, your sister promised me a turn around the room. He looked at Aara. Aara looked back at him. And then she did the thing she had spent her entire life not doing. She stepped forward, out from the wall, out from the corner, out of the particular shadow she had been standing in since she could remember standing anywhere. I did promise, she said. Shall we? Her mother, 12 feet away, saw it all. Arabella, 2 feet away, said nothing. And Aara Langford, the quiet one, the sensible one, the shadow, walked forward into the light of the room on the arm of the Duke of Allister, and she did not look back, not even once. The room watched them. Aara felt it the way you feel a change in temperature. Not one pair of eyes, but 20, 30, the collective weight of a gathering that had arrived with certain expectations about how the evening would unfold, and was now being forced to revise every one of them. She kept her chin level. She kept her steps even. She had spent 22 years learning how to move through rooms without being noticed, and now she was learning, in the space of 30 seconds, what it felt like to be noticed by everyone at once. It was terrifying. It was also, and she would not have predicted this, something close to extraordinary. "You're holding your breath," the Duke said quietly, beside her. "I'm not." "You are. You have been since we turned toward the center of the room," she exhaled, deliberately. He was correct, and she resented it slightly, and was grateful for it more. "I'm not accustomed to this," she said, keeping her voice low. "To being observed in this particular way." "What way?" "Like I've done something unexpected." "You have," he said simply. "You stepped forward when every instinct you had was telling you not to." She glanced at him sideways. "How do you know what my instincts were telling me?" "Because I recognize the argument on your face," he said. "I've had it with myself many times." She didn't answer that. She tucked it away in the part of her mind that was cataloging this man. His precision, his economy, the way he said direct things without apparent awareness that they were anything other than ordinary. She was building a picture of him piece by piece, the way you assemble something whose shape you don't yet know, but whose pieces feel important. They completed the first turn around the room without incident. On the second pass, her mother found her. Not with words. Not yet. Her mother was too skilled for that, too practiced at the particular art of saying things without saying them, in rooms full of people who were listening for exactly that kind of thing. She found Aara with her eyes, across the distance between them, and in those eyes was an entire conversation compressed into a single look. "Who do you think you are?" her mother's eyes said. "Who gave you permission? What makes you think this belongs to you?" Aara held the look for 3 full seconds. Then she turned back toward the Duke and said, "You mentioned your estate in Chesterfield County. Did you grow up there?" The shift was deliberate. Her heart was hammering, and she made her voice steady anyway. He answered, something about arriving at the estate at age 12, after his father's business interest moved south from Philadelphia. And she listened, genuinely listened, while simultaneously tracking the movement of her mother across the room, with the peripheral awareness she had developed, the same way a hunted thing develops peripheral awareness, out of pure survival instinct. Her mother was moving toward them. The Duke was saying something about the Blue Ridge in summer, about a particular ridge visible from the Eastern Library windows, and Aara said, "That sounds like something a person would miss when they were away from it." And he paused, just briefly, and said, "Yes, it does," with a quality in his voice that had not been there before. Something quieter, less guarded, the sound of a person surprised by their own admission. Her mother arrived. Aara. The voice was warm. It was always warm in public. "Mrs. Hartwell would so love to speak with you, darling. She's been asking after you." "That's very kind of her," Aara said. "I'll find her shortly." A half-beat pause. "She's just there. It would only take a moment." "Mama," Aara looked at her directly. "I said I'll find her shortly." The warmth in her mother's face didn't disappear. It simply developed a layer beneath it. Something cooler. Something that had always been there, but was usually better concealed. "Of course," she said. The word arrived with a precision that meant the opposite of what it said. She withdrew. "Your mother," the Duke said a moment later, "is a woman accustomed to being obeyed." "Yes." "And you've been obeying her for some time." "Most of my life." "What changed tonight?" Aara thought about it. Not the diplomatic version. Not the version she would have given anyone else. The small, safe version that required nothing and risked nothing. She thought about the real answer.
"I counted 7 candles," she said, "and decided that wasn't sufficient."
He looked at her steadily, and then, without announcement, without build-up, the corner of his mouth moved. Not the predecessor this time, the actual thing. Quiet and brief, but genuine. A smile that had clearly had very limited exercise and showed it. The kind of smile a man produces when something catches him entirely unprepared. It changed his face completely. She felt it like a step off a ledge.
It was during the 3rd pass around the room that the evening cracked open. She heard it first. A shift in the conversation nearby. A dropping of voices. The particular social vibration that precedes something being said that can't be unsaid. She tracked it instinctively, turning her attention toward a cluster of older men near the far corner. Men whose conversation had previously been quiet and self-contained, and was now possessing a different quality entirely. She caught one phrase, just one. Langford situation, the older girl, a prior arrangement. Her feet kept moving, her face stayed even. Beside her, the Duke was speaking about something. The topic didn't register because every part of her that wasn't maintaining forward momentum was focused on the cluster of men and the fragment she'd heard and the sudden, cold unease moving through her. A prior arrangement. She knew those words. In Virginia, in 1815, those words meant exactly one thing. Miss Langford, he had noticed. She hadn't hidden it well enough. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, nothing. I'm sorry. You were saying about the harvest?" "I wasn't saying anything about the harvest." He stopped walking. She stopped with him because she had no choice. He wasn't looking at her the way most men looked when a woman seemed upset. The vaguely alarmed, somewhat inconvenienced look of someone waiting for it to pass. He was looking at her the way he looked at everything, with attention. "What did you just hear?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But it alarmed you." She stopped. The word alarmed was too small for what was happening in her chest. "Concerned me," she said carefully. A phrase, something about an arrangement. She paused. "Regarding my sister." Something changed in his expression. It was quick and controlled, and she almost missed it. "What kind of arrangement?" "I don't know." She looked at him. "Do you?" The silence lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds in which his expression went through something she couldn't follow. Some internal reckoning, some weighing of things. "I've heard," he said, choosing each word with care. "A rumor." I dismissed it as exactly that. Her mouth was dry. "What rumor?" He looked at her steadily. "That your mother made an agreement with Gerald Whitmore 3 months ago. A social arrangement, an introduction, a sustained courtship, in exchange for Whitmore clearing a particular debt." Aara stared at him. "A debt," she repeated. "Your father's." The room continued around them. The fiddler played. Someone laughed. The entire evening proceeded with complete indifference to the fact that Aara Langford was standing in the middle of it, with every piece of her world quietly rearranging itself into a shape she didn't recognize. Gerald Whitmore, 60 years old if he was a day. 3 times married, twice widowed, once divorced in circumstances no one spoke of directly. A man of substantial means and no particular reputation for warmth. And Arabella, bright, beautiful, unaware Arabella, was being positioned for him, while their mother spent the evening trying to remove Aara from the sight of the one man in the room who might have noticed what was happening. "That's why she wanted me in the corner," Aara said. Not a question, just the thought arriving at its destination. "Not because I crowd Arabella. Because if someone of your standing were to notice anything amiss, were to see how our mother was managing the room, she needed me out of the way, quiet, invisible." She stopped. "She needed me to play the part I've always played." "Miss Langford, does Arabella know?" He hesitated. "I don't believe so." "Does Whitmore know he's been promised someone who hasn't been asked?" The hesitation this time was shorter. "Men like Whitmore," he said quietly, "rarely find it necessary to ask." She had about 40 seconds before she did something that could not be undone. She spent them standing completely still, holding the whole of it. Her mother's maneuvering, Arabella's oblivion, Gerald Whitmore somewhere in this room, the debt she knew nothing about, the corner she'd been assigned to. Holding all of it the way you hold a thing to test its weight before you decide what to do with it. Then she said, "Where is he?" "Miss Langford, I would ask you to consider—" "I'm not going to make a scene," she said. "I give you my word, I simply need to know where he is." He studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him. He tilted his head toward the east side of the room, near the card tables, blue coat. He arrived about 20 minutes ago. She turned. Gerald Whitmore was 62, broad through the middle, with the particular confidence of a man who has been wealthy long enough to stop remembering what uncertainty felt like. He was speaking to two other men, laughing at something one of them had said, and from this distance, he looked exactly like every other powerful man in this room. Comfortable, settled, certain. He also, she noticed, kept looking toward Arabella. Not the way men usually looked at Arabella, admiring, somewhat helpless, carried along by the current. This was different. This was the look of a man assessing something he already believes he has a claim to. Proprietary. Patient. Counting down. Something moved through Aara that she had no clean name for. Not rage. Not yet. Closer to clarity. The cold, absolute clarity of someone who has just had a blurry thing come suddenly and completely into focus. "You're thinking about telling her," the Duke said beside her. "Yes." "Tonight?" "If not tonight, when?" She turned to look at him. "Tomorrow, our mother will have had the night to construct a better version of events. Next week, Arabella will have been introduced to Whitmore in some carefully arranged setting, and the story will already have a shape." She paused. "She has to know tonight. While it's still—" She searched for the word. "While she still has a choice." He was quiet for a moment. "And if your mother denies it?" "Then Arabella can decide who to believe." "And if she believes your mother?" That one landed harder. She let it. Considered it honestly, the way she tried to consider all things honestly, even when honesty wasn't comfortable. "Then I've said what I had to say," she said finally. "And the consequence is whatever it is." He looked at her for a long time. The kind of looking that was also thinking, also measuring, also, and she felt this with a certainty she couldn't explain, also something that bore a significant resemblance to respect. "You know," he said, "that your mother will consider this a betrayal." "My mother," Aara said, "has been considering me a disappointment for 22 years. I expect I can survive the upgrade." She found Arabella near the refreshment table, and in the 10 seconds of approach, she revised her plan 4 times. Direct was better than oblique. Arabella would see through oblique. She was not a woman who missed subtext. Brief was better than elaborate.
Elaborate gave people time to redirect the conversation, and private was essential. This was not a thing that could happen in the middle of a room full of listening ears. "Arabella," she touched her sister's elbow. "I need to speak with you, privately." Arabella looked at her. Something in her expression shifted, the social brightness dimming by a degree, the real Arabella surfacing beneath it, the one who knew Aara's voice well enough to hear when it meant something. "All right," she said, setting down her glass. They moved to the edge of the room, into a pocket of relative quiet near the curtained alcove. Arabella turned to face her, and Aara felt, acutely, the strangeness of this, of being the one with information for once, of being the one who knew something her sister didn't, of standing in front of Arabella Langford and saying what she was about to say. "Mama made an arrangement," she said, "with Gerald Whitmore." Arabella's face didn't change immediately. The brightness held for another half-second. Inertia, the expression still performing while the mind behind it processed what it had just received. Then it faded. "What sort of arrangement?" "The kind that involves you." Silence. "Papa has a debt," Aara continued. "I don't know the details. I don't know how much or how long. But Mama made an agreement with Whitmore. An introduction, a sustained courtship, leading to an offer." She held her sister's gaze. "Without asking you." Arabella said nothing for a very long time. Her face had gone to a particular stillness that Aara recognized. Not composure, not performance, but the stillness of someone thinking so fast their body has temporarily suspended all other operations. "Gerald Whitmore," she said finally. "Yes. He's been looking at me all evening." Her voice was flat. Not angry, yet. Processing. I thought it was... She stopped. "I thought it was ordinary." It wasn't. "No." Arabella exhaled. Something moved through her face. Several things. One after another. Too quick to fully catalog. Shock, first. And then something that looked like the retroactive assembly of a pattern she'd been seeing pieces of for weeks, without knowing what they added up to. And then, finally, underneath it all, a kind of hurt that was quiet and deep and very old. The hurt of someone who has just discovered that the person who was supposed to protect her was busy building a cage instead. "How long have you known?" 20 minutes. "Who told you?" A pause. "The Duke," Aara said. Arabella looked at her. Really looked. The full, undivided, searching look of a woman seeing her sister with new eyes. The look lasted long enough that Aara felt the exact shape of it, the exact quality of what was being reassessed. "He told you," Arabella said slowly. "He's been with you all evening, and he told you about Mama and Whitmore." He'd heard a rumor. He wasn't certain it was true. "But you are." Aara thought of her mother's grip on her arm, the instruction to stay in the corner, the warmth that had never quite reached her the way it reached Arabella, the small, relentless daily work of making her small. "Yes," she said. "I'm certain." Arabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with a precision that surprised Aara, "She put you in the corner tonight so you wouldn't attract attention. So the Duke would look toward me and not toward anything she didn't want him to see." "Yes, but he looked at you anyway." "Yes." Arabella absorbed this. The quiet between them was different from their usual quiet. It had a different texture, less familiar, less settled. The texture of two people standing on ground that has just shifted beneath them. "Aara," Arabella said, and her voice had lost every last trace of the ballroom, of the performance, of all the bright, practiced ease she wore like a second skin. "I'm sorry." Aara blinked. "What?" "I'm sorry." Arabella's jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright in the way that precedes crying when a person is too proud or too practiced to cry in public. "I've known what she does to you. I've watched it my whole life. I told myself it wasn't, that she didn't mean." She stopped, breathed. "I told myself a lot of things." "Arabella, I let her do it," Arabella said. "That's the truth of it. It was easier to let her make you small than to make myself a target." She swallowed. That was a cowardice I don't know how to undo. The room moved around them. The fiddler played. Gerald Whitmore laughed at something across the room, loud and satisfied. The laugh of a man who believed the evening was going his way. Aara looked at her sister. Beautiful, honest, imperfect, frightened Arabella, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not entirely, not yet. These things didn't happen in 30 seconds. Not the real kind, not the lasting kind. But the beginning of it, the first necessary condition. "It doesn't have to stay undone," she said quietly. Arabella looked at her. "Whitmore is still here," Aara said. "Mama is still managing the room. And you still have a choice." She paused. "That's why I told you tonight, while you still had one." A beat of silence. "What do I do?" Arabella asked. And she said it the way she almost never said anything. Raw, unpolished, stripped of the grace she usually wore between herself and the world. Just a question. Just a real one. It was the first time in Aara's memory that Arabella Langford had asked her sister for help. Aara took a breath. "First," she said, "you stop smiling at Gerald Whitmore." She didn't see her mother approach. She was watching Arabella's face, watching the quiet, irrevocable closing of a door in her sister's expression. The moment a woman decides something that cannot be undecided. And then her mother's voice arrived like a blade through cloth. "There you are." Her mother appeared between them with the calm efficiency of a general flanking a position. Her eyes went from Arabella to Aara and back again, reading the room with the speed of someone who had spent 40 years reading rooms. Something in her face went very still. "What are you two discussing?" "Nothing," Arabella said. Her mother looked at Arabella's face, then at Aara's. The calculation happened fast. Aara could see it, the rapid assembly of what the two of them standing here like this meant. What might have been said, what had been understood. "Aara?" Her voice was soft, carefully, precisely soft. "What have you done?" And Aara, who had spent 22 years answering that question with silence, with lowered eyes and folded hands, and the quiet, practiced smallness of a woman who had been told 100 different ways that her thoughts were inconvenient and her wants were excessive and her very presence was too much, looked at her mother and said, "I told her the truth." Her mother's expression didn't break. It held. It held with the extraordinary tension of something under enormous pressure that has not yet found its fracture point. "You had no right," she said very quietly. "She had every right," Arabella said. And the three of them stood there, in the edge of that bright, oblivious room, and the evening finally became something it had not been when it started. It became honest. Her mother did not raise her voice. That was the thing about her mother. She never raised her voice in public. She had other instruments, finer ones, and she played them with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the performance. The smile that didn't reach the eyes, the pause that arrived exactly one beat too long, the specific targeted quiet that told you exactly how much damage had been done without ever naming the wound. "We will discuss this at home," her mother said. "We'll discuss it now," Arabella said. Her mother looked at Arabella the way she almost never looked at Arabella. Without the warmth, without the pride, without the particular glow she reserved for the daughter who had always returned it. Just a look, level and cold and appraising. The look of a woman recalculating. "You don't understand the full situation," she said. "Then explain it to me." "Not here." "Then when?" Arabella's voice was steady, in the way that things are steady right before they are not. "You were going to arrange my entire future without telling me."
When exactly were you planning to have this conversation, Mama? The morning of the wedding?
Arabella, a warning.
How much? Arabella asked. Papa's debt. How much?
The silence was its own answer. Ara watched her mother's face go through something she had never seen it go through. A sequence of calculations too rapid to follow. The frantic internal arithmetic of someone whose plan has just collapsed, and who is simultaneously assessing the damage, estimating the salvage, and deciding which version of herself to deploy. It lasted less than 3 seconds. When her mother spoke again, she had selected composure. "Your father made some investments," she said, "last year. They did not perform as expected. The amount owed to Whitmore is significant." A pause. "Whitmore offered a solution. I accepted it on behalf of this family." "On behalf of me," Arabella said. "On behalf of all of us, including you." Her mother's voice took on a new quality. Not warmth exactly, but something that was attempting to be warmth, reaching for it from a distance. "Arabella, you would not have wanted your father imprisoned. You would not have wanted this family to lose everything. I made the only decision available to me. You made it without telling me, because I knew you would react exactly as you're reacting now." Her mother's composure held, but something underneath it was pressing hard against the surface. "You are 24 years old, and you are very beautiful, and you have never once had to think about what it costs to keep this family standing. I have been thinking about it every single day for 15 years. Whitmore is not a romantic figure, I grant you that. But he is solvent, and he is willing, and he would have treated you—" "Don't!" Arabella's voice cracked on the word, just once, just briefly, and then sealed itself back up. "Don't tell me how he would have treated me. You don't know that. You made an arrangement with a man 3 times my age, and you were planning to present it to me as a fait accompli and dress it up as opportunity." She paused. "That is not protecting this family. That is trading one of its members for it." Her mother flinched, barely, but Aara saw it. Then her mother turned to look at Aara, and whatever had been pressing against the surface of her composure found its direction. "You," she said softly. "You did this." Aara had been waiting for it. She had known it was coming the moment she opened her mouth to Arabella. Had known it the way you know a storm is coming when the air changes, before any cloud is visible. She had prepared for it, or thought she had. She had not fully prepared for the specific quality of her mother's voice in that moment. Not angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger had volume, had edges, had a shape you could push back against. This was something else. This was the voice of a woman who had decided on the spot and with complete conviction exactly where the blame lived. "I told her the truth," Aara said, again. The same words she'd said before. They felt different the second time. Not a defense, but a position. "You told her your version," her mother said. "You took a fragment of something you barely understand, and you handed it to your sister like a weapon." A weapon against what? Aara asked. Against a marriage she didn't consent to? Against this family's survival. Her mother stepped closer, and the warmth was fully gone now, and what replaced it was something Aara had always known was there, had always felt beneath the surface of every interaction, but had never seen this exposed and direct. Do you have any idea what I have spent 22 years holding together? Do you have any understanding of what this family's position in this county has cost me, personally, in effort and calculation and— She stopped, breathed. No, of course you don't. Because you have spent 22 years in the margins, Aara. In corners counting candles, leaving everything difficult to the people willing to do difficult things. The words hit. She felt each one. She felt them the way you feel a familiar wound reopened. Not surprise, but the sharp, specific pain of a place that has never fully healed. That's not fair, Arabella said quietly. I'm not interested in fair, her mother said. I'm interested in— Mrs. Langford. The voice came from behind Aara, low, even, carrying just far enough to reach the four of them without extending past. All three women turned. The Duke of Allister stood 3 feet away. He had not been there 30 seconds ago. He was there now, composed, unhurried, with the expression of a man who had heard enough to understand the situation and had made a decision about it without apparent deliberation. He looked at her mother with the specific courtesy of someone who is being polite, not because they are uncertain of their position, but because they consider it worth the effort. Forgive the intrusion, he said, in a tone that did not sound like it was asking for anything. I wonder if I might borrow Miss Aara Langford for a moment. Mrs. Hartwell has asked after her. It was, they all understood immediately, a fiction. The kind of fiction that functions as an exit, offered clearly enough that everyone could see through it, offered anyway because the alternative was a conversation that would damage all parties. Her mother looked at him. The calculation happened fast. He was the Duke of Allister. He had spent the better part of an hour with Aara. He was standing in front of her now, in a semi-public alcove, offering her daughter a way out of a scene that was 3 more sentences from becoming visible to the room. Of course, her mother said. She said it the way she had said, of course, earlier in the evening, with a precision that meant the opposite of the words. But she said it, and she stepped back. Aara looked at Arabella. Arabella's jaw was set. Her eyes were dry and her spine was straight, and she looked, in that moment, less like the woman who lit up every room she entered, and more like someone who had been lit up by other people's expectations for so long that she had almost forgotten she could generate her own light. Go, Arabella said quietly. I'll handle Mama. Aara hesitated. The hesitation lasted exactly 1 second. 1 second of the old instinct, the corner-seeking, wall-pressing, trouble-avoiding instinct. And then she turned and walked with the Duke back toward the room. You didn't have to do that, she said, when they had moved far enough from the alcove that the words were private. I know, he said. She'll be angrier for it. Tomorrow, when she has time to— Miss Langford. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. He turned to look at her with that direct, unhurried attention that she was beginning to recognize as simply the way he did everything, without decoration, without performance, without any gap between the intention and the act. Are you all right? The question was so simple, so direct, without qualifiers, without the careful social choreography of someone asking how you were when they expected a polite answer. Just, are you all right? The full weight of a genuine inquiry, offered without condition. She almost said yes. The reflex was 22 years deep. No, she said instead. He nodded, like that was the correct answer, and he had expected it. What she said to you was not entirely wrong, Aara said.
The honesty of it cost her something, but she paid it. I have spent 22 years in the margins. I have let things happen that I should have questioned. I have made myself small when I should have taken up space. She paused. She wasn't wrong about the facts. She was wrong about what they meant. He was quiet for a moment. What do they mean? They mean I wasted time, she said. Not that I was worth less for having spent it. He looked at her with that expression she was still learning to read, the careful, open, unguarded quality that appeared sometimes, briefly, when something she said reached past whatever distance he kept between himself and the world. No, he said quietly. Not worth less. Not by any measure I've encountered tonight. She held that sentence still, let it settle, did not deflect it, did not qualify it, did not perform the modest, practiced self-erasure she would have deployed an hour ago. She let him mean it. Your Grace, she said carefully, why did you come tonight? The question surprised him. She saw it, the fractional pause, the slight shift in his expression, the recalibration of someone who had not expected to be asked. Mrs. Hartwell has been very persistent, he said. That's why you came to the party, she said. I'm asking why you came to the corner where I was standing. A longer pause. Because, he said, and the word arrived slowly, as though each one after it required care. I was tired. I have been very tired for a long time of rooms full of people performing their best versions of themselves. And you were standing against the wall, counting candles, and looking like you were actively resisting the temptation to leave. He stopped. I recognized the temptation. You wanted to leave too, she said. I always want to leave, he said. I came over to you because you were the first person I'd seen all evening who didn't want anything from me. He paused. That is rarer than it ought to be. She thought about that, about what it cost to move through the world the way he did. Wealthy, titled, known, the object of endless calculation by people who saw a position instead of a person. She thought about rooms full of people who looked at her and saw a sister, a spare, a shadow. The mirror was not exact, but the shape was familiar. I wasn't performing, she agreed. I was simply present, poorly. Honestly, he corrected, and then, more quietly, I haven't spoken this much at a gathering in 2 years. She looked at him. Not since your wife passed. The words arrived gently. She had not been certain she would say them, had held them for a moment, testing whether they were the right thing or only the true thing, and concluded that tonight she had decided those two were the same. He didn't flinch, didn't withdraw. He absorbed the sentence with the care of someone who had learned to carry that particular weight without being crushed by it. She died in the autumn of 1813, he said. Fever. It was quick. A pause. They tell you quick is a mercy. They're not wrong. They're also not entirely right. No, Aara said. I imagine they're not. She was very quiet, he said. The words seemed to come from somewhere separate, some room inside him that he opened with deliberation. Constance. She had no patience for rooms like this one. She used to say that most conversation was just noise dressed up as meaning. A beat. She was usually right. Aara said nothing. She let the space stay open, the way you leave a door ajar for something that needs room to pass through. I miss the quiet of her, he said finally. Not the specifics, the particular quality. the sense that there was another person in the room who was not performing. He looked at Aara directly. "You have that quality." I noticed it from across the room, and it alarmed me considerably. "It alarmed you," she repeated. "It has been 2 years," he said. "I had come to some conclusions about how the rest of my life would be arranged. Quiet, solitary, manageable." He paused. And then Mrs. Hartwell's party. The twist came 15 minutes later, and it came from Gerald Whitmore. She didn't see him approach. She was watching the room settle into its later evening rhythms, the older guests beginning their departures, the younger ones finding corners for conversations that the candlelight made feel more private than they were. The Duke was beside her, close enough that they had both stopped pretending the proximity was accidental, and she was in the middle of saying something about the impracticality of formal gardens when she heard Whitmore's voice directly behind her. "Miss Langford." She turned. He was looking at her, not at Arabella, who was visible across the room, but at her, with an expression that was several things at once, and none of them pleasant. Annoyed, assessing, recalculating. "I understand," he said, without preamble, without the performance of warmth that men like him usually employed when they wanted something. "That you've been having quite the evening." Aara looked at him steadily. "I've been enjoying Mrs. Hartwell's party, Mr. Whitmore." "Gerald," he said, and the presumption of it landed like a hand on a shoulder she hadn't offered. "I think we're past formalities, don't you? Given the nature of our family's relationship." She said nothing. "Your mother speaks very highly of your practicality," he said. He was smiling now, a smile that had been in service long enough to pass for natural to anyone who wasn't watching carefully. "She says you're the sensible one, the one who understands how things work." A pause that was not empty. "I wonder if that sensibility extends to understanding when a situation is already settled." "I'm not certain," she said, with a steadiness she pulled from somewhere deep. "What situation you're referring to?" His smile didn't change, but something behind it did. "I think you do," he said softly. "I think that's precisely why you've spent this evening in the company of—" He glanced, briefly, deliberately, at the Duke. "Other people." Back to her. "Your mother and I had an agreement, Miss Langford. A clear one. It would be a shame if a young woman's—" Another pause, heavier this time. "Impracticality caused difficulty for a family that can't presently afford difficulty." The Duke had gone very still beside her. Aara felt it. The complete, deliberate stillness of someone choosing, in real time, to hold rather than act. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Whitmore and found, to her own surprise, that she was not frightened. She was clear. The same cold clarity she had felt when she looked at him from across the room and understood what his gaze toward Arabella meant. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "my family's financial situation is not a currency I accept threats in." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong word. Threat. Is it inaccurate?" A beat. His smile thinned by a degree. "You're bolder than I expected," he said. "Your mother described you differently." "My mother," she said, "has not always described me accurately." "Whitmore." The Duke's voice was quiet, completely quiet. No elevation, no dramatic weight, nothing theatrical. Simply his name, said in that level, even tone that somehow arrived with more force than a shout. "I believe you have concluded your conversation." Whitmore looked at him. Something moved through his expression. The rapid calculation of a man assessing the distance between where he stood and where he could afford to stand. The Duke of Allister was not a man you crowded. This was apparently an understanding they shared, without requiring elaboration. "Of course," Whitmore said,
with the smooth recovery of a man long practiced in it. He inclined his head toward Aara. "Miss Langford, a pleasure." He withdrew. The Duke said nothing for a moment.
Aara let out a breath she had been holding since Whitmore said, "our family's relationship," and the release of it was so complete that she felt briefly lightheaded. "He threatened you," the Duke said. "He intimated," she said, plausibly deniably. "He threatened you," he said again, "in the middle of a party, while I was standing next to you." A pause. "He's either very bold or very stupid." "Both, I suspect," she said. "Men who have been comfortable for a long time tend to stop distinguishing between the two." He turned to look at her. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not quite anger, but the controlled aftermath of it. The tightly contained heat of someone who has been angry and has decided what to do with it. "Your father's debt," he said. "Do you know who holds it?" She frowned. "Whitmore, presumably." "Whitmore purchased it," he said, 3 months ago, from a creditor in Fredericksburg. She went still. "You know this." "I know Whitmore," he said. "We have some mutual acquaintances in the Richmond business community. I didn't know your father was involved until tonight." He paused. "But I know Whitmore's pattern. He acquires debt specifically to acquire leverage. He has done it before." Another pause, more deliberate than the last. "And I know the creditor who sold it to him." She looked at him. "You know him well?" "Well enough," the Duke said carefully, "to have a conversation about a buyout." The sentence arrived quietly, without announcement, without the fanfare of a gesture designed to impress. Just a man saying a plain thing in a plain voice, the way he said everything. Aara stared at him. "You can't," she began. "I haven't done anything yet," he said. "I'm telling you what's possible. What's done with that information is your decision, not mine." "Why would you—" She stopped, started again. "You've known me 4 hours." 3.5, he said. "That is not a meaningful distinction." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her steadily. "I told you earlier that I came to this party because Mrs. Hartwell was persistent. That was true." He paused. "I also told you that I came to your corner because you weren't watching for me. That was true as well." He stopped. The room moved around them, and he let it move, unhurried, while he decided what came next. "I did not tell you that I have spent the past 3.5 hours in the company of a woman who says true things plainly, who protects her sister at personal cost, who stands her ground against her own mother and the man twice her age without raising her voice, and who looks at me like a person instead of a title." He stopped again, breathed once. "I am telling you now." She had no words ready for that. She had planned for many things this evening, had planned in the limited, self-protective way of someone who does not plan for good things, for most of the bad ones. She had not planned for this. For a man who saw her, not Arabella, not the shadow, not the sensible one, but her, with clear eyes and no particular illusion, just a man looking honestly at a woman and saying, "I see you, and I am not looking away." "Your Grace." "Ashton," he said. And then, as though aware of the weight of it, the door it was opening, the distance it was crossing, he said it again. "My name is Ashton." Her mother found her 20 minutes before the evening ended. Arabella was not with her. Arabella, Aara had noted, had spent the last hour speaking with Mrs. Hartwell on one side of the room, while Gerald Whitmore, recalibrated and unsmiling, remained on the other. Whatever Arabella had said to their mother in the alcove had produced a ceasefire, and ceasefires, Aara knew, were not resolutions. They were merely the breathing room before the next reckoning. "Walk with me," her mother said. It was not a request, but it also, Aara noted, was not the voice from the alcove. The stripped,
cold voice of a woman past caring about appearances. This was something else. Something that cost her mother, visibly, to produce. Something that sounded, beneath the control, almost tired. They moved to the edge of the room, out of the main current, and her mother stood for a moment without speaking, which was its own signal. Her mother almost never stood without speaking, almost never conceded a silence she could fill. "The Duke," her mother said finally. "He's been with you all evening." "Yes?" "He's interested." Not a question. "I believe so." A pause. "And you?" Aara looked at her mother, at the face she had been reading her entire life, its warmth and its calculation, its love and its management of that love, all of it so intertwined that she had never entirely been able to separate them. "Yes," she said, "I am." Her mother absorbed this. "He's a good match," she said, and the words came out flatter than Aara expected, without the triumph they would have carried if the evening had unfolded the way her mother had planned it. Just flat. Factual. The statement of a woman who had spent the night positioning Arabella for a connection that had instead found Aara, and who was now, with visible effort, rearranging her internal ledger. "Mama," Aara said it quietly, "I need you to understand something." Her mother looked at her. "If anything happens between myself and the Duke, if this evening becomes something, it will not be because you managed it. It will not be credited to your account. It will be mine." She held her mother's gaze. "And Arabella's future is hers. Whatever it costs to clear Papa's debt, we will find another way. But it will not be purchased with her life." The silence stretched. Somewhere across the room, the fiddler played the last notes of the final set, and voices rose briefly and then settled, and the evening began its slow and graceful dying. "You've changed tonight," her mother said. It was not a compliment exactly, but it was not an accusation either. It was something rarer, something that sounded almost like recognition. "Yes," Aara said simply. "I have." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then, with the slow, careful movement of someone setting something down that they have been carrying for a very long time without being certain they had the right to carry it, she nodded. Once. Small. Real. It was not an apology, but it was, Aara understood, the closest her mother had ever come to one. The carriage ride home was the quietest 40 minutes Aara could remember. Not the familiar quiet of her mother managing the room. That quiet had texture, had weight, had the constant low hum of calculation beneath it. This was different. This was the quiet of three women sitting with the specific exhaustion of people who have said true things and cannot unsay them, who have crossed distances that don't allow for return, who are not yet certain what the territory on the other side looks like, but know, with bone-deep certainty, that the map they'd been using is no longer accurate. Her mother sat across from her and looked out the window and said nothing. Arabella sat beside Aara, with her hands folded in her lap, and her jaw set, and her eyes clear in the way that follows crying when the crying has been done privately and completely, and you have arrived at the other side of it, intact. She had not told Aara when she had cried. She had simply arrived at the carriage with that particular quality about her, washed clean of something that had been accumulating for a long time. Halfway home, Arabella reached over and took Aara's hand. She didn't say anything. Aara didn't say anything. Their mother looked out the window. Aara held her sister's hand and thought about Ashton Worthington and the 4,000 books in his library in Chesterfield County, and the way he had said, "My name is Ashton," like a door opening, like an invitation to step through something that, once crossed, would reorganize the rest of her life. She thought about that the rest of the way home. The morning arrived hard. She had expected it, had known, falling asleep, that the night's events would not remain contained in the night, that they would follow her into the daylight and demand the accounting that candlelight had deferred. What she had not expected was the specific form of it. She came downstairs to find her father in the sitting room. He was a large, quiet man, the kind of man who had been significant once and had gradually allowed significance to drift away from him without quite registering the moment it left. He had the look, this morning, of someone who had been awake for several hours with nothing but his own thoughts for company, which was never a comfortable arrangement. "Aara," he said. "Papa?" She stopped in the doorway. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression she associated with him at his most honest, without the bluster, without the management, without the performance of authority he deployed when he thought it was expected of him. Just a man, tired and honest. "Your mother told me about last night," he said. "All of it?" "Enough." He paused. "More than I expected." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know she'd spoken to Whitmore. I want you to know that. I knew the debt was that we were in a difficult position. I didn't know she'd made an arrangement." Aara said nothing. She was deciding how much of that to believe, and finding, to her own surprise, that she believed most of it. Her father was many things. An architect of plots was not among them. "She did it to protect us," he said. "I know," Aara said. "That doesn't make it right." He absorbed this with the heaviness of a man who knows the argument and has lost it already, inside his own mind, before it was ever spoken aloud. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at her hands, then at the floor, then back up at her face. "The Duke of Alcester," he said. "He spoke to you last night." "Yes." "For some time, from what I understand." "Most of the evening." Her father looked at her steadily. "He's a serious man," he said. Not a question. The statement of someone who had made inquiries at some point and retained the results. "Lost his wife. Keeps to himself. Very well respected." A pause. "Also, apparently, very taken with my younger daughter." Something moved through her chest. She kept her face still. "We spoke," she said carefully. "We found common ground." "Common ground," her father repeated. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one. "Your mother thinks it's remarkable." "Does she?" "She's been remarkabling about it since 6 o'clock this morning." He stood, slowly. The way a man stands when his knees have been carrying him for 50-odd years, and have opinions about it. "She's also been re-examining certain arrangements." He looked at Aara directly. "The Whitmore situation. It won't proceed." Aara went still. "Papa?" "I should have been managing my own debts," he said, "not farming out my family to manage them for me." He said it plainly, without drama. The way a man says a thing he has arrived at through honest reckoning and doesn't see the point in dressing up. "I'll speak to Whitmore myself. Whatever needs doing, I'll do it." He paused. "It may require selling some of the western acreage. I've been holding on to it for sentimental reasons that don't withstand scrutiny." "Papa!" She didn't have the full sentence ready. She felt it, though. The full weight of it, the relief and the ache of it. The complicated, imperfect, genuine love of a family that had never been very good at saying what it needed to say, and was trying, this morning, with what tools it had. "Don't." He held up a hand, not unkindly. "I don't need thanks. I need to have been a better steward of this family for the past 15 years. And I can't undo that retroactively. But I can start from this morning." He looked at her. "You did a brave thing last night. Your sister told me that, quite specifically, in those exact words, this morning at 5:30. A pause. She's very emphatic at 5:30. Aara almost laughed. She felt it arrive and let it. Just barely, just briefly. A small release of pressure. "She always has been," she said. The letter arrived 3 days later. She was in the garden, not the formal section, the kitchen garden, the one that had always been her preferred territory because no one else in the family considered it worth occupying. When the housemaid found her with an envelope addressed in a hand she didn't recognize, and then immediately did, she turned it over. The seal was plain, unembellished. The handwriting was precise and even. The handwriting of someone who had made decisions about how to put letters on a page and found no reason to revisit them. She opened it and read it standing there among the tomato plants, with dirt on her gloves and her heart doing something unreasonable. "Miss Langford, I have been poor at writing letters for some years. I find this morning that I am poorer still, because the thing I am attempting to say does not reduce well to paper. I will try nonetheless. I mentioned the library at the Chesterfield estate. I mentioned it deliberately. I had thought, at the time, that I was making conversation. I have since reconsidered that assessment. I was not making conversation. I was attempting, imprecisely, to say, there is a place I consider significant, and I find that I want to know whether you would find it significant too. I have not wanted to know that about anyone in 2 years. I am aware that this is not a conventional letter. I am aware that the conventional approach would involve calling on your father, speaking in generalities, proceeding through established stages in their proper order. I intend to do those things. I will do them properly and in sequence, and I will not rush the process, because you are not a woman who should be rushed, and I am not a man who rushes things he cares about. But I wanted you to know, before the propriety began, what the propriety is in service of. A.W. She read it twice, then a third time. Then she folded it with hands that were not entirely steady and stood in the kitchen garden for a moment with the summer heat on her face and the letter in her hands, and something building in her chest that had no clean name, but felt, more than anything she could remember feeling, like the first full breath after a very long time of breathing shallowly. Arabella found her an hour later. She was back inside by then, the letter pressed between the pages of the natural philosophy volume on her bedside table, which she recognized as exactly the kind of hiding place that was not actually hiding anything from a sister who knew her well enough to check her books. She recognized it and did it anyway. Arabella knocked once and opened the door without waiting, which was the way she had been entering rooms since childhood, and looked at Aara with the expression of someone who already knows the answer, but wants the confirmation. "You've heard from him," she said. "Good morning," Aara said. "It's 11 o'clock." Arabella sat on the edge of the bed with the ease of someone who had been sitting on the edges of beds in this room since they were old enough to walk down the hall. "You've heard from him. You're doing the thing you do when you're trying not to show that something matters." "What thing?" "You're being very calm." Arabella tilted her head. "You're being so calm, it's alarming." Aara looked at her sister. "He wrote," she said. "Yes." Arabella was quiet for a moment. Then, with none of the performance, none of the practiced grace, none of the bright social warmth she wore in every other context, just her own face, plain and genuine and a little raw. "Are you happy?" The word landed somewhere tender. Aara turned it over, tested its edges, thought about a man who counted the things she looked at and called it conversation, who said her name like it was worth saying, who stood between her and Whitmore's implications without being asked and without requiring credit for it. "I think," she said carefully, "that I might be becoming it." Arabella nodded, slow. Something moved through her expression, a complex, quiet thing, the kind that contained grief and gladness in the same moment and didn't try to separate them. "Good," she said.
That's good, Aara. And you? Aara asked.
Arabella was quiet for a moment.
I'm angry, she said honestly. Still. At Mama. At Whitmore. At the fact that I've been in this house for 24 years and I still managed to almost miss what was happening. She paused. But I'm less angry than yesterday, and I expect I'll be less angry again tomorrow. So that's a direction, at least.
It is, Aara agreed. Arabella looked at her for a long moment.
I meant what I said, she said. What I told you at the party. About letting Mama... about not doing enough. Her voice was quiet and steady, in the way of things said once, meant permanently. I'm going to do better.
I know, Aara said.
You believed me that quickly?
You've never said something you didn't mean, Aara said.
It's one of the things about you I've always known.
Arabella looked at her. The rawness in her expression didn't go anywhere, but something shifted in it, opened slightly, the way something shifts when a door is left ajar that has been shut for too long.
We haven't talked enough, Arabella said. Not like this. Not really.
No, Aara agreed.
We haven't.
We should.
Yes, Aara said. We should.
The twist arrived on a Thursday, 8 days after the party, 6 days after the letter. 2 days after her father had, with the quiet dignity of a man reclaiming something he had set down too long ago, sent word to Whitmore's solicitor that the matter was not what Whitmore had been led to believe, and that he would be addressing the debt through other means. Whitmore's response came not through a solicitor. It came through her mother. She was in the front parlor when her mother appeared in the doorway with a letter in her hand and an expression Aara had never seen on her face before. Not the management, not the warmth, not the calculation. Something stripped of all of that. Something that looked, in its bare form, like fear. He's going to the county court, her mother said. Aara straightened. What?
Whitmore.
Her mother came into the room and set the letter on the table between them and sat down, which was unusual. Her mother rarely sat when she was managing a crisis, as though staying on her feet was a tactical choice.
He says your father misrepresented the terms of the original debt. He's filing a claim. He's asking for... She stopped, swallowed. He's asking for the house, Aara. The property. All of it.
The room was very quiet for a moment.
He can't do that, Aara said. His solicitor says he can.
Her mother's voice was flat. Not composed. Flat. The way something goes flat when the structure beneath it has given way.
If the court rules in his favor, and Whitmore has, he has influence in this county. He has...
She stopped again. Aara looked at her mother, at the letter, at the shape of the crisis that Whitmore had constructed with the patient. Deliberate efficiency of a man who had done this before, acquired debt, applied leverage, and when the leverage was declined, escalated until compliance became cheaper than resistance. He had calculated that this family, facing the loss of their home, would find Arabella's compliance a reasonable price. He had calculated wrong. "I need to send a message," Aara said. Her mother looked up. "To whom?" "To the Duke." Her mother was silent for a moment. Something moved through her face. Pride, refusal, the old instinct to manage, to contain, to handle things within the family. And then, beneath all of that, something that had been building for 8 days, the slow, painful, necessary work of a woman learning to set down a weight she had been carrying alone for too long. "All right," her mother said. He arrived the following morning, not with fanfare, not with ceremony. He arrived the way he did everything, directly, without decoration, with his solicitor at his side and a folder of documents under that man's arm, and the specific, settled look of someone who had made a decision and was here to act on it. He shook her father's hand. He greeted her mother with courtesy. He looked at Aara across the entrance hall with an expression that contained several things at once: concern, steadiness, and beneath both of those, something quieter and warmer, something that was not for the room, but for her specifically. "I'm here," that look said. "I came." The meeting lasted 3 hours. She was not in it for most of them. She sat with Arabella in the second parlor, and they talked, genuinely talked, with the focused intensity of two women who had 22 years of proximity and not enough of this particular kind of conversation to make up for it. They talked about their mother, about their father, about the years of corners and candlelight, and the specific shape that their family's love had taken: crooked and complicated and real. They were still talking when the door to the study opened. Her father appeared first, then Ashton's solicitor, then Ashton himself. And she could read it in the set of his shoulders before he said a word. Not triumph, because he was not a man who wore triumph. Just completion. The particular quality of a man who has done what he set out to do. "It's settled," her father said. His voice was thick in a way it hadn't been this morning. "The debt is discharged. Whitmore has been... The court claim will not proceed." Her mother put her hand over her mouth, just briefly. Then she removed it and straightened, and became, again, the composed woman she had spent 40 years constructing. Except that her eyes were bright in a way that composure couldn't fully contain. Arabella exhaled, long, slow, the exhalation of someone who has been holding something for 10 days and has just set it down. Aara looked at Ashton. He crossed the room to her, not hurrying, not performing, just moving toward her the way he had moved toward the corner of a ballroom 8 days ago, with the unhurried certainty of a man who knows where he's going. "You didn't have to do that," she said, softly, for him only. "We've had this conversation before," he said, "and my answer is the same. You didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "I didn't have to." He looked at her directly. "I wanted to. There is a difference, Miss Langford. I'd like you to start believing me when I make it." She held his gaze. Outside, the summer moved through its afternoon rhythms, heat and bird song, and the particular amber quality of Virginia light in July. Inside, her family reassembled itself around the news of its own survival. Her mother and father speaking in quiet voices. Arabella with her hand over her own heart, eyes closed, breathing. "Ashton," she said. His name, plain, the door open. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just..." He stopped. Something moved through his expression. The open, unguarded quality she had first seen across a crowded room and had been learning, in increments, to read. "Just tell me I haven't misjudged this completely." "You haven't," she said. "Not even slightly." He called on her father formally 4 days later. Her father told her about it afterward, briefly, in the plain, honest way he had been speaking to her since the morning after the party, as though the events of that night had opened something between them that had always been available and was only now being used. He said Ashton had been direct. He said he had asked without maneuvering, without the oblique social approach that would have allowed everyone to pretend uncertainty until the answer was given. He had simply said, "I would like your permission to court your daughter. My intentions are serious, and I want to be honest about them from the beginning." Her father had said yes. He told Aara this while she was reading in the kitchen garden, and when he finished, he went back inside without ceremony, the way a man does when he has delivered the important thing and understands that everything after it belongs to someone else. She sat with the book closed in her lap and the July heat around her, and felt the shape of what was happening settle into her. Not as a shock, not as something to brace against, but as something that had been assembling itself piece by piece since the moment she had held a man's gaze across a ballroom and refused, for the first time in 22 years, to look away first. He found her in the kitchen garden 3 afternoons later. She heard his step on the gravel, learned already the particular quality of it, and looked up and found him standing at the edge of the garden path with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who is prepared for something and has discovered, on arrival, that preparation only takes you so far. "Your housemaid directed me here," he said. "I know she did," Aara said. "I told her to." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression, quick, warm, the predecessor of that rare smile she had seen twice now, and was already certain she would spend a significant portion of her life trying to produce again. "You expected me. You said you'd call Wednesday or Thursday," she said. "It's Thursday." "It is." He came into the garden with the same deliberate, unhurried movement, and stopped near her, and looked at her the way he had been looking at her from the beginning, with attention, with care, with the honest, undecorated quality of a man who has decided that what's worth doing is worth doing plainly. He didn't sit. He stood with his hat in his hands, and he said, "I wrote you a letter that was not entirely coherent." "It was very coherent," she said. "I said I would proceed properly and in sequence." "You did say that." "I've been reconsidering the timeline," he said. Her pulse quickened. She kept her face still because some habits were useful, and then she stopped keeping it still because she had decided, 8 days ago, standing in the corner of a ballroom, that she was done performing smallness for people who were offering her something real. "How significantly reconsidered?" she asked. "Significantly," he said, and then, with the same plain, unembellished directness he brought to everything, "Aara, I am not a man given to impulse. I have been methodical my entire adult life. I make decisions slowly, and I hold them firmly, and I have not, made an error I would describe as significant in some years." "That's reassuring," she said softly. "I am telling you this," he said, "because I want you to understand that when I say I have not been uncertain about this since the 3rd hour of Mrs. Hartwell's party, it is not a romantic embellishment. It is simply the case." He paused. "I would like to marry you. Not at the conclusion of an appropriate courtship period. Not when the social calendar makes it convenient. Not when your mother has managed the circumstances to her satisfaction." He stopped, took one even breath. "I would like to marry you because you are the first person I have met in 2 years who makes me feel like myself instead of a title. Because you say true things without apology. Because you hold silences without filling them. Because you stepped forward out of a corner 8 days ago when every instinct you had was telling you not to, and that was the most courageous thing I watched anyone do all evening." He paused. "And because I have 2,900 unread books, and I want to read them with someone who will argue with me about every one." The kitchen garden was very still. Somewhere in the house, Arabella was practicing the pianoforte, a slow, imperfect scale that stopped and restarted, the sound of someone learning something by doing it wrong and trying again. Her father's voice drifted from the study window, low and indistinct. Her mother's footstep, somewhere above, crossed the ceiling like punctuation. This was her life. This specific, complicated, imperfect, honest life.
Yes, she said. He looked at her. You're certain? You told me you don't make significant errors, she said. I'm telling you, I don't either. Not about this. She held his gaze, the direct, undeflected hold she had been practicing since the moment she decided to stop counting candles as a way of surviving rooms. Yes, Ashton, I'm certain. He crossed the 3 feet between them and took her hand, both hands in his, with the careful, deliberate gravity of a man who understood the weight of what he was holding and had no intention of being careless with it. His hands were warm and steady, the hands of a man who built things and held things and did not let go of things he chose to keep. She looked at him. He looked at her. Around them, the summer went about its business, unhurried, indifferent, golden. I should still speak with your father, he said. You already spoke with my father. About the courtship, not about... He'll say yes, she said. You're certain? I'm very certain, she paused. He likes you considerably more than he likes Whitmore. The smile arrived, the full one, rare and genuine and completely unguarded, the smile of a man who has not had much occasion for it and has found one. It changed his face the way it always changed it, and she felt it the way she had felt it the first time, like a step off a ledge, like a door opening, like a light coming on in a room that had been dark long enough to mistake the darkness for normal. Aara Langford, he said, with her name in his mouth the way it deserved to be said, carefully, like something kept. I believe this is the best decision I have made in some considerable time. She looked at this man, this direct, quiet, unperforming, grieving, rebuilding, genuine man, and felt the whole of the evening that had started it all move through her in a single clear current. The corner, the candles, the counting, the moment she held his gaze and refused to look away. 22 years of making herself invisible, and one night that changed the direction of everything. Yes, she said simply. I believe it is. The girl who had been told to stand in corners and let her sister shine had stepped into her own light, and this time she was never going back to the dark.